Mr. Carter, are you accusing your own family of fraud? The judge's voice was calm, but the question made the entire courtroom go still. The elderly man standing at the plaintiff's table didn't answer right away. His wife gripped his sleeve like she was afraid he might collapse. Finally he spoke. Yes, Your Honor. A quiet murmur spread through the room. Across the courtroom, a young man in a tailored suit leaned back in his chair and shook his head with a faint smirk. This is unbelievable, he muttered. The elderly woman heard it. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked directly at him. You promised you would protect us. The young man looked away. The judge raised his hand. Order. He flipped through the documents in front of him again. According to these records, he said slowly, the property was transferred legally. The old man's voice suddenly grew firmer. No, sir, it was stolen. The word hung in the air. Several people in the gallery leaned forward. The judge studied him carefully. And who exactly stole your home? For a moment, the old man said, nothing. Then he lifted a shaking hand and pointed across the courtroom. Every head turned, because the person he was pointing at wasn't a stranger. Before we continue, if you enjoy intense courtroom stories like this, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. The judge followed the direction of the man's finger. His expression changed slightly. You're accusing him? The old man nodded once. Yes, Your Honor, my grandson. The courtroom was tense as Thomas and Margaret Carter sat side by side at the plaintiff's table. Their hands were tightly clasped together, knuckles white, while across from them, Ethan Carter lounged casually in his chair, arms crossed, an unsettling smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. The air seemed thick with expectation, every spectator leaning forward as if they could hear the unspoken tension. The judge cleared his throat, glancing between the two parties. Mr. Carter, he began, voice measured. You're alleging that your grandson defrauded you of your property? Thomas straightened in his seat. Yes, Your Honor, he said, his voice steady but cold. A hush fell over the room. Even Ethan's smirk faltered slightly, but only for a moment. The bailiff shuffled papers as the judge continued. According to these records, the property was legally transferred. Mr. Carter, what exactly are you claiming happened? Margaret Carter raised the worn photograph she had kept in her hands all morning. We trusted him, she said, voice breaking. We trusted him with everything we had. Ethan rolled his eyes. This is ridiculous, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for several in the gallery to hear. The judge raised a hand sharply. Order, he said. The gallery fell silent again as Thomas Carter leaned forward. Your Honor, he said, we didn't sell our home. We were tricked. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Cameras flashed. The tension was thick enough to touch. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. Tricked? Explain, Thomas. Carter pointed slowly across the room at Ethan. Every head turned and whispers filled the gallery. He's the one who took it, Thomas said. Our grandson. Gasps erupted. Some of the spectators covered their mouths. The judge's pen paused mid-air as he stared at Ethan, incredulous. Your own grandson? He asked. Are you certain? Yes, Thomas replied, unwavering. We trusted him. We welcomed him into our home. And this is what he did. The judge exhaled slowly. All right, let's start from the beginning. Counsel, please present your case. The prosecutor stepped forward, a stack of documents in hand. Your Honor, the Carters are claiming that their grandson orchestrated a fraudulent transfer of property, allegedly using digital documents and manipulative tactics to gain control over the family home. We have evidence and eyewitness testimony that will demonstrate the timeline and the deception involved. The courtroom leaned in as the first witness was called, Margaret Carter. She spoke softly at first, describing the early days when Ethan was a child, the family memories tied to the house and how the home had been the center of the Carters' lives. Every small detail she mentioned, the squeaky gate, the creaking floors, the guava tree in the backyard, painted a picture of a home loved beyond its monetary value. And then, Your Honor, Margaret continued, he started showing an unusual interest in the house as he got older. Questions about value, legal documents, digital files. At first it seemed like he was just helping. We had no reason to suspect anything. The gallery shifted in their seats, murmurs spreading. It was clear the story was no ordinary property dispute. The prosecution displayed emails, digital forms, and time-stamped documents showing how Ethan had gained access to the Carters' personal information under the guise of helping them secure their property. The defense, of course, attempted to portray Ethan as a helpful grandson, concerned about his grandparents' well-being. All of these actions, his attorney argued, were taken in good faith to protect the Carters from potential scammers. There was no intent to defraud, but the judge wasn't convinced. He leaned back, rubbing his temples, clearly troubled by the growing evidence. The room was silent for a moment, the tension building like a storm about to break. Just then, a surprise witness entered, the Carters' neighbor, who had witnessed Ethan's repeated visits, his insistence on updating records, and even the moments when the Carters were persuaded to sign documents without fully understanding them. Every detail added to the mounting case that this was not simply a misunderstanding. It was calculated manipulation. The judge's gaze flicked from Thomas to Margaret to Ethan. This case is more complicated than it appears at first glance, he muttered. We will need to examine all evidence thoroughly, and with that, the courtroom braced itself, knowing that the story of betrayal and deception was only beginning to unravel. The courtroom had gone silent as the next piece of evidence was presented. The prosecutor placed a laptop on the desk and opened a series of digital documents, each one time-stamped and signed. Every eye in the room was on the screen as emails and scanned signatures revealed how the Carters' consent had been manipulated. Your Honor, the prosecutor said. These emails were sent by the defendant Ethan Carter in the weeks leading up to the transfer. Notice how he repeatedly instructed the plaintiffs to sign the forms, claiming it was routine verification. The judge leaned forward, squinting at the small text. And these were presented as legitimate documents to the Carters? Yes, Your Honor. And as the testimony will show, they were not fully informed of the consequences. Margaret Carter's hands trembled on the stand as she recounted those days. He said it was to protect us. That he was making sure no one could steal our house, she said, her voice cracking. We didn't question him. We trusted him. The courtroom gasped. Some spectators whispered among themselves. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his smirk fading. The defense attorney stood. Your Honor, my client acted entirely in good faith. He was concerned for his grandparents. All communications were meant to assist them in securing their property from potential external threats. There was no fraudulent intent. The judge's eyes narrowed. Intent or not, the result is that the plaintiffs no longer have possession of their home. Mr. Carter, why didn't you question the documents before signing them? Thomas Carter, seated beside his wife, remained silent, staring at the floor. His jaw tightened. Margaret gave a quiet sigh, her eyes flicking toward Ethan, whose expression had grown noticeably defensive. The prosecutor then called the neighbor, Mrs. Jennings, to the stand. She was elderly, but her voice was firm. I saw him bring that laptop over. I remember asking why he needed them to sign it, and he said it was just routine paperwork. They seemed unsure, but he was very persuasive. Too persuasive for me to feel comfortable. The gallery murmured. Every statement added weight. To the case, painting a picture of a young man who had exploited trust, a courtroom slowly realizing that this was no ordinary family dispute. The judge paused and looked around. This is troubling. It's one thing to assist your grandparents and another to benefit personally from their lack of understanding. What exactly did he gain? The prosecutor clicked to the next slide. Your Honor, the property was transferred to Ethan Carter's name under the pretense of protection. Shortly after, he placed it on the market for a significant sum, intending to sell it. The courtroom reacted immediately. Gasps and whispered conversations erupted. Ethan's defense. Attorney looked alarmed, but he quickly regained composure. "Objection, Your Honor," he said. "These assertions are speculative and lack clear evidence of intent to sell." The judge raised a hand. "Sustained for now. But the timeline of events raises serious questions." At that moment, the bailiff announced another witness, someone the Carters hadn't expected. It was the local bank manager. She walked to the stand confidently. "Your Honor, we have records of account activity showing large withdrawals and transfers linked to the property immediately after the signatures were submitted. While the funds were not yet withdrawn entirely, the intent to benefit from this property is evident." A hush fell over the room. Margaret clutched Thomas's arm tightly, her knuckles white. Ethan's face turned pale. For the first time, the courtroom had begun to doubt the story of the helpful grandson. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "It seems we are far beyond a simple misunderstanding. Mr. Carter, did you comprehend what you were signing at the time?" Thomas and Margaret shook their heads slightly. "No, Your Honor. We thought he was helping us," Margaret whispered. The gallery shifted again. Even outside, the story would make headlines. It had the perfect ingredients: betrayal, trust, and family drama. The prosecutor paused and glanced at the gallery. "Your Honor, we also have emails from Ethan Carter to third parties discussing how to legally maneuver the property to his advantage, showing premeditation." A few people in the courtroom gasped audibly. Ethan's hands tightened into fists, his composure beginning to crack. The judge rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "It appears there's more to this case than meets the eye. We will need to examine all of the digital evidence thoroughly." As the court recessed for a brief pause, the tension was palpable. The Carters sat silently, the weight of betrayal heavy on their shoulders. Ethan left the courtroom with a controlled stride, but it was clear his confident facade had begun to crumble. And for viewers following this story, if you're enjoying the unfolding twists, don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching from, because what happens next in this case is something nobody in that courtroom saw coming. The next witness promised to reveal something so shocking it would turn the entire trial upside down. And the gallery waited in anticipation, knowing the story was far from over. When the courtroom reconvened after the break, the air was heavier than ever. Everyone sensed that the next witness could change everything. The bailiff called forward a young man in his late 20s, an IT specialist from the county records office. "Please state your name for the record," the prosecutor said. "Lucas Bennett," he replied. "I handle digital records and property transfers for Jefferson County." The prosecutor turned to him. "Mr. Bennett, have you reviewed the transfer of the Carters' home?" "Yes," Lucas said. "I've traced the digital signatures and access logs. The transfer requests came from a device registered to Ethan Carter using their login credentials, but from an unusual location, several blocks away from the Carters' residence. And the emails used to instruct them were crafted to look official, with legitimate-looking headers and digital verification codes. This was not a typical property update." A murmur went through the courtroom. Margaret's hands shook as she gripped Thomas's arm. Even the gallery leaned forward. The judge raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying the plaintiffs were misled into signing?" "Yes, Your Honor," Lucas replied. "Everything appears to have been orchestrated to make them believe it was routine paperwork, when in fact it was a fraudulent transfer." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking to the gallery as if searching for sympathy. His defense attorney interjected, "Objection, Your Honor. This is circumstantial. My client never forced or coerced them. He was simply assisting." The judge waved his hand. "Overruled. Let's continue." The prosecutor then called the Carters' neighbor, Mrs. Jennings, back to the stand. She recounted the weeks when Ethan had visited repeatedly, insisting that digital verification was needed and making the Carters feel obligated to sign the forms. She spoke calmly but firmly, painting a picture of subtle manipulation over time. A trusted grandson bending the rules without immediate detection. The tension in the courtroom reached its peak when the prosecutor finally presented the last piece of evidence, a set of recorded conversations obtained legally from Ethan's own email account. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, voice steady, These recordings reveal that Ethan knew exactly what he was doing. He discussed with friends how to ensure the Carters would not fully understand the paperwork, describing it as protection while planning to transfer the house to his name. The judge's eyes widened. He leaned back in his chair and gestured toward Ethan. "Is this true?" Ethan's face went pale. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally shook his head. I didn't think it would. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean," the judge interrupted sharply. "Mr. Carter, intent matters, but deception and betrayal, especially of one's own family, cannot be ignored." Margaret gasped softly, tears forming in her eyes while Thomas clenched his fists on the table. The courtroom hung on every word, the tension electric. Then, just when it seemed the case had reached its climax, the prosecutor dropped the final bombshell. "Your Honor, there's one more critical piece. We obtained confirmation from the title office that Ethan attempted to list the property for sale immediately after the signatures were submitted. This proves he intended to profit from the transfer, regardless of any assurances of protection." The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed. Ethan's defense attorney sputtered, trying to regain control, but the damage was done. The jury and gallery stared in disbelief. The judge exhaled slowly. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, the court understands the gravity of the situation. We will review all evidence thoroughly before issuing a verdict. But it is clear that there has been serious deception." Margaret pressed her head to Thomas's shoulder, whispering, "We trusted him. Our own grandson." Thomas's jaw tightened, and he thought he could take everything without consequence. As the court recessed for the day, spectators whispered about the shocking betrayal. Social media outside the courthouse was already buzzing. The story had everything: family drama, digital deception, and a shocking betrayal that no one could have predicted. And for viewers watching this story, if you're following the twists and turns so far, don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching from, because the final courtroom verdict was even more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The Carters had endured months of emotional torment, and as the next session approached, everyone in the courtroom knew that justice, finally, would have to be served. The courtroom was packed the following morning. The tension from the previous sessions lingered in the air like a storm ready to break. Thomas and Margaret Carter sat silently, their hands intertwined, eyes fixed on the judge. Ethan Carter sat across the room, shoulders tense, trying to maintain a calm exterior, though the color had drained from his face. The judge adjusted his glasses and tapped his gavel lightly. "We are ready to hear the closing statements before delivering the verdict." The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor, this case is about more than property. It's about trust, deception, and the abuse of familial bonds. Ethan Carter manipulated his grandparents, exploiting their trust to gain control of their home. The evidence is clear: emails, digital records, witness testimony, and even his own communications demonstrate intent to defraud. This was premeditated, calculated, and deeply personal." The defense attorney rose. "Your Honor, my client acted with the intent to protect. There was no coercion, no malicious intent. He believed he was assisting the plaintiffs in securing their property against outside threats. Any misunderstanding was unfortunate, but not criminal." The judge leaned back, his gaze sweeping the courtroom. Silence fell, punctuated only by the faint rustle of papers. The tension was almost unbearable. "After reviewing the evidence, the court finds the case troubling," the judge said finally, his voice deliberate. "But the pattern of deception, the manipulation of signatures, and the attempted transfer of property all point to a calculated act against those who trusted him the most." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "It is the judgment of this court that Ethan Carter's claim to the property is invalid. The house shall be returned immediately to Thomas and Margaret Carter. Further, the court orders restitution for any losses incurred due to the transfer, and let this serve as a reminder: familial bonds cannot be used as tools for deception." Ayo. Stunned silence filled the courtroom. Then, as if a dam had broken, the gallery erupted in applause. Margaret buried her face in Thomas's shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks. Thomas exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. Ethan slumped in his chair, the weight of reality pressing down. He had underestimated the consequences of betrayal, and the courtroom had made it abundantly clear. The judge banged the gavel one final time. Court adjourned. Outside the courtroom, the story spread quickly. News crews captured the emotional reunion, while social media buzzed with outrage and disbelief. The Carters' story became a symbol of justice reclaimed, a cautionary tale about trust, family, and deception in the modern age. As the Carters walked home that afternoon, their hands intertwined, Margaret whispered, "It feels like we can finally breathe again." Thomas nodded. "It does. And maybe now, we can finally heal." Even in the shadow of betrayal, justice had prevailed. And for viewers watching this story unfold, remember, trust is precious, and justice, though sometimes delayed, has a way of finding those who deserve it. If you followed this story from start to finish, make sure you subscribe for more courtroom dramas where truth, suspense, and justice collide. Comment below with your thoughts. What would you have done if this happened to your family? The courtroom doors closed behind them, but the lesson lingered. Deception can strike anywhere, even from the people you love most. But the law can restore what was lost and reveal the truth for all to see.